Let's talk to our next guest about the issues of federalism and more. Karla Jones joins us. She is the Senior Director of the Federalism and International Relations Task Force at the American Legislative Exchange Council. Well, that's a word. That's a mouthful. Karla, good morning to you. Welcome to KWTO.
Good morning to you, and feel free to call us by our acronym ALEC. I know it's a lot easier than American Legislative Exchange Council.
Yes, I often do, Karla. So, Karla, we often have ALEC folks here. I always tell folks that I've worked with ALEC for over 15 years now in a ton of different ways as a legislator in the private sector and in so many other ways, and such a great partner for our state legislators all across the country. Karla, why don't you first tell us a little bit, remind our audience a little bit about ALEC, what it does, and specifically what your Federalism and International Relations Task Force focuses on.
Well, ALEC is an organization made up primarily of state lawmakers. Anywhere between 20 and 25% of U.S. state lawmakers are members at any one time. And what we do is we bring together the public sector and the private sector at annual conferences to discuss and debate model policy. And once that debate and discussion is done, model policies that are adopted by our issue-related task forces. We have 9 of them, ranging from health and human services to communications and technology, energy, environment, and agriculture. And I'm the senior director of the task force that focuses on federalism, international relations, and lately we have been joined with the Homeland Security Task Force. So those 3 major issue areas.
Fantastic. Karla, I think a lot of folks are not quite sure what federalism means these days. Just the very word is a little deceiving, right? Federalism, when you look at it, you automatically think federal government, but kind of the opposite is true, right? Karla, federalism is the proposition that the states are the parent, right? That the states are the governing force here. And only because of the consent of the governed and the union of the 50 states is the federal government supposed to have its power. Now that's been flipped a little bit on its head the last couple hundred years, right? As the states have conceded some power to the federal government, and the federal government has grown into areas it never was meant to be. But federalism is the original concept on which the country was founded, wasn't it?
Exactly. Our founders believed that the states empowered the federal government, not the other way around. But people can be forgiven for not knowing what federalism is. We actually had a state lawmaker who believed that the word federalism meant federal power as opposed to state sovereignty, which is one way of phrasing it that I think helps people understand what it means. Mm-hmm. But basically, it's encapsulated in the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which basically says that if certain powers aren't specifically granted to the federal government, then they are to devolve to the state and local government.
Fantastic. It's such a great concept. And I think we need to re-educate the entire country about what it exactly means. And maybe we'd be in a different place now.
It's one of our guiding principles: federalism, free markets, and limited government.
Absolutely. Folks, we're speaking to Karla Jones, Senior Director of the Federalism and International Relations Task Force at ALEC. Karla, one of the things that you've been working very hard on is petitioning for an amendments convention under the U.S. Constitution's Article 5 provision. Karla, would you explain to our audience, what is Article 5? What do you believe was the purpose of it being placed in our U.S. Constitution in the first place? And what would be an amendments convention under that provision?
Well, Article 5 is the section of the Constitution that calls for, that describes how the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, can be amended. So there are basically 2 ways to amend the U.S. Constitution. Either 2/3 of both houses of Congress need to petition to propose an amendment, or 2/3 of the states, which with 50 states, if 34 states send in applications, adopt applications within their state legislatures for a single subject or a plenary subject, which basically is an application that says we want to call an amendments convention and we're not limiting what the subject of that convention is. If 34 states adopt applications, then it is incumbent upon the U.S. Congress to call a place, a time, and a date for an amendments convention. And that would be a convention, a delegation, where states would each send commissioners or delegates, the terms are interchangeable, to the convention to consider a constitutional amendment limited to the scope of the application. So, for example, Missouri has an application that you guys adopted, I think, in 2018, 2017, limiting congressional term limiting congressional terms. So making it so that people like Mitch McConnell can't stay in Congress for decades. And if, for example, 34 states decided to adopt applications for congressional term limits, then Congress would have to call that amendments convention. Missouri would select the commissioners that would attend that convention, and then they would discuss what an amendment would look like. And if all the commissioners at the convention decided that they wanted to introduce this constitutional amendment or propose this constitutional amendment, then it would still need to go through that same 38-state ratification process. And there's where Congress would come in again, and they would have to determine the mode of ratification. Almost every single constitutional amendment to the U.S. Constitution has been decided by state legislatures. There's a second mode of ratification by state conventions. And that has only been used once, and that was to repeal prohibition.
Interesting. Karla, it sounds like a fascinating tool. Some of the criticisms I've heard from folks are that, this would be great if it could work, if the theory could work in practice, but people are worried about a runaway convention, of it not being limited to the scope. What about choosing the delegates? How are we going to know we're going to get people that actually care about free markets, federalism, and limited government, and not a bunch of radicals? People are worried about the damage that's already being done, not only in the federal government, but in some of our crazy big blue states. So what do you say to some of these criticisms that I'm sure you've heard that arguments people are making against calling such a thing? I think it's more of a fear of the unknown and what could happen. And how do we restrain that from the priority of the topics that are selected?
Well, the first thing I would ask those people is, why do you trust Congress to propose constitutional amendments? Because these same people have been fine with Congress proposing constitutional amendments. The second thing I would say is, yeah, you are going to have commissioners with whom you disagree. Chances are most Missourians are not going to agree with the commissioners sent by the state of Massachusetts, and vice versa. However, most scholars agree that what's going to happen is you're going to have a one state, one vote rule. And so Missouri is going to have as strong a voice as Massachusetts or Vermont or any other blue state. The second thing is, in today's world, do we really believe that the First Amendment Convention isn't going to be televised, at the very least on C-SPAN? And do we really believe that the state legislatures who sent those commissioners aren't going to be watching them really carefully. And if they deviate from the scope of the application, texting, calling, telling them, hey, I see what you're doing. Stop now. Otherwise, we're going to have to recall you. And at this point, I believe Missouri is considering a bill, SB 274, which proposes procedures for appointing commissioners to an Article 5 Amendments Convention. And so you guys are already at least discussing the types of rules that would govern who gets to be a commissioner and what responsibilities they have to limit discussions to the focus of the application and what state legislatures can do in terms of recalling them if they deviate from that scope.
Excellent discussion. Karla, if folks would like to get some more information about ALEC's efforts with the Article 5 convention or anything else regarding Article 5, where would you like to direct them to at this time?
I'd like to direct them to our website, www.alec.org. We've recently released a video series on Article 5, and we have a slew of articles and model policy on it. And we also have our Article 5 handbook for state lawmakers.
Fantastic. Karla Jones, Senior Director of the Federalism and International Relations Task Force at ALEC, alec.org.